Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Tzadik Tet of Bava Basra, and we are at the bottom of Tzadik Chet Amud Bet. We are at one, two, three, four lines up, middle of the line, Rabbi Chanina. And let's back up and just remind ourselves what we've been talking about. We've been talking about when you sell a building, when you say that you're selling a building, sort of what's the required size based on the nature of the building that you are selling. And so you can't call something, basically a tracklin, if it's not at least 10 amos by 10 amos. You can't call something a kantir unless it's 12 amos by 12 amos. Yeah. And then we said, how do you determine the appropriate height for any space? So in our Mishnah, we saw that you would half the sum of the length and the width. So basically, if the length is 8 and the width is 10, so then that's 18. So your height needs to be 9. Basically, it's an average of the an average between the height and between the width and the length. And we then saw there's another opinion that says it's got to be basically at least the size of the width. And so that was where we brought a proof to all of this, to specifically the first opinion of half the height and the width from the Beit HaMikdash, because in the first Beit HaMikdash, the Kodesh area, what's known as the Heichal, that area was 40 amos long, 20 amos wide, and 30 amos tall. So of course, half of 40 plus 20 is 30. And so 40 plus 20 is 60, half of that is 30. And so that was the proof that we brought. And now we're going to discuss the height of the sanctuary, because there is the issue is that the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the inner sanctuary, the place where the Aron was standing, the Aron, and let me just give some structural comments so that we understand. The Aron had these poles that were along each of the sides. If you remember we've seen it absolutely 100%.
In Shabbos.
Well, we saw it. We've seen it in several places. Right. I think the most recent place that we saw it in real detail was in Yoma. Right. But we had, oh yes, in Erevin, you're right. We did have all the measurements, lots of measurements in Erevin. But the bottom line is that in that inner sanctuary, there was the Aron, and on the Aron were the Kruvim that were created in connection with the original Aron. But in addition, two cherubs, there were two standing cherubs that were also in the room as well. Not on the Aron, but just standing there as well. So let's now see where we get to and see what Rabbi Chanina is going to ask. So Rabbi Chanina nafik l'kiryasa. So he once went out to the villages, and Ramule Kraya Adadi, and the villagers said, "Look, there seems to be a contradiction between the Torah and the within various psukim, because in Malachim Aleph Parak Vav Pasuk Bet, it says, Ba'bayis asher bana hamelech Shlomo la Hashem shishim amah arko of esrim rachbo ushloshim amah komaso." That when it comes to the entire structure, meaning both the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? The Kodesh was 40 by 20. The Kodesh HaKadoshim was 20 by 20. So if you put them end to end, you end up with a structure that's 60 by 20. And it says that the height was 30 amos. Uksiv, and at the same time, it says, V'lifnei hadvir, inside the Kodesh HaKodashim, esrim ama orech ve'esrim ama rochav ve'esrim ama komaso. It was 20 by 20 by 20. So 1 second, you said earlier and that's later in that same perek, in perek Vav, that's pasuk kaf of Malachim Aleph. So in that same chapter, you see that there's a height of 30 and a height of 20. So how do we understand that? So Amar Lahu, he explained, Ki kachashiv misfat kruvim ulamala, that when the measurement is done in the Kodesh HaKodashim, it was not from the floor, but rather it was from the top of the wings, or wherever the top would be, of the kruvim that were standing there. And so that's where you would have, above that, there would be 20 amos, 20 amos. So my kamash malan, what is it teaching us by, instead of measuring from the ground, measuring from the top of the kruvim? So hakamash malan, as we turn to Tzadik Tenem Al, this is what it's teaching us. Lamata kilamala, that just as above there was nothing there, and anything that effectively, there was nothing there. So then malamala ein mishamish klum, there was nothing there. There was nothing that would take up any room. Af lamata ein mishamish klum. Also below, there was nothing that took up any room. And this supports Rabbi Levi. The Amar Rabbi Levi, the Itema Rabbi Yochanan, Davar Zem Sores Biadenu Mavosenu. The following is a tradition we have from our forefathers. Makom Aron Ukruvim Eno Mina Hamida. That the ark and the kruvim, the kruvim that were standing in there as well, along with the kruvim that were on top of the ark, all of them did not take up any room. There was no measurement. So if it was a 20 by 20 room, you would have the following miracle: that if you went on one side of the Aron, and let's say the Aron was smack in the middle, which I believe was the case. So you go to the Aron and you measure from one side of the Aron to the wall, you get 20 amos. You measure from the other side of the Aron to the wall, you get 20 amos. You measure from one wall to the other, you get 20 amos. So by some miracle, the measurement from the Aron to the wall is half the distance, and the measurement of the other end of the Aron to the wall is half the distance. And there seems to be no measurement, even if you would take a measuring stick and you'd see that there's a measurement to the Aron itself. Somehow, when you measured the entire room, there would be no substance there. It's truly an amazing miracle. Some people can argue that we're gonna have some Rashbam, and we're gonna have some Tosos. So we'll get to the Tosos in a moment. And so Tanya Nami Haki, and we in fact have a brisa along these lines. Aron Sha'asa Moshe. Yeshlo Revech Eser Amos Lakol Ruach V'Ruach. Right? It says here's the proof that in fact it was 10 amos in every direction. So you would measure, and it would be 10 amos to the wall. And yet, if you measured from wall to wall, it would be 20 amos, notwithstanding the fact that that you just measured that from the you just measured from the Aron to the wall, and it was half the distance in both directions, and yet somehow there was no extra space that would take up space for the Aron. Really,
a minute ago you said it was 20 amos from the wall to the Aron on one side, and 20 amos from the wall to the on the other side.
No, you misheard. It's 10 amos from the Aron to the wall, but 20 amos from wall to wall. So,
but before you said earlier, when you were describing if the Aron is in the middle, you said it'd be 20 from the back to the wall.
No, I said if I said 20, I meant 10, but I'm pretty sure
okay. Okay, in the beginning, that's why I was confused. That would have meant the room was 40. I was going to ask you.
No, the room was 20. If I said 20, I apologize. I certainly meant 10. I thought I said 10, but okay. All right, so now let's back up for a moment. So we've got this incredible miracle. Now, Tosos here in the Tosos Ki Kachashiv raises an interesting point, because It's the last Tosfos on Tzaddik Amud Aleph. Kika Chashav Misfat Kruvim Ulamala, that we're measuring 20 amos from the top of the Kruvim. The Perish Mikra in his commentary on this pasuk, Perish Rashi, the Tikra de Aliyah's Heichal, Haisa Gavoa Michel Kochim Eser Amot Michel Kochim Eser Amot. And so that what Rashi is saying is that there really the room was 20 amos tall, but there was 10 amos above the roof as like an attic space. So you imagine you have a 30 amos height, but then you put in an upper level that has that creates that lowers the roof from 30 amos to 20 amos below Yankan. And it seems like that Rashi hadn't seen this verse. Now that of course hadn't seen this Gemara. Now that of course seems quite remarkable because Rashi, even though we have Rashbam on this Masechet from Daf Kuf Tet on, but here it's certainly Rashi certainly had learned all of Shas, so it seems unlikely that that's the case. And so the Gra offers what I thought was a and I heard this from Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, that offers the following very interesting explanation that I thought is quite appealing, and so makes a lot of sense. So remember that in our Mishnah,
what is the point? I'm sorry. What is the premise of Tosfos here? That there was 30 plus another 10?
No. The premise of here is that Rashi says on the pasuk where it says that the Kodesh HaKodeshim was 20 amos tall, it says that there was an attic, that there was another 10 amos above it.
So that would be with total of 30 then?
And so it would be a total of 30.
From the bottom to the top.
From the bottom to the top. But that's what this Gemara also says, that there's 30, but says that there's no attic, because it says that the measurement of 20 was from the top of the standing kruvim that Shlomo HaMelech created. And so that seems to be inconsistent with Rashi. Rashi says that there's an attic and that the main ceiling is 20 amos off the floor, whereas this Gemara says that no, the ceiling was 30 amos, and it was and the reason that it's said to be 20 amos in the Navi is because it was measuring from the top of the kruvim.
So the two kruvim were 10 amos tall then.
And the kruvim were 10 amos tall, exactly. So which is it? Because we are going to see that in fact the kruvim were 10 amos tall. So which is it? So the Gra offers the following. He says that here's the understanding of the debate in our Mishnah. Because remember, in our Mishnah, we said that the Tanakhama said that you measure the ceiling based on half the height, half the length and half the width. And Rav Shimon ben Gamliel responded, "What, you're going to bring a proof from the Beis Hamikdash? That's not going to be a good proof." And so here's the debate. According to the Tanakhama, you have two rooms in the original Beis Hamikdash. You have the outer room, which is a total of 20 by 40 and has a 30 height. And you have an inner room that is 20 by 20 and therefore needs to have a 20 height.
Right.
And so when Rashi says that he's talking about from the measurement of sort of an inner ceiling and then there's an attic above it, he's paskening like the Tanakhama. Whereas when the Gemara is here discussing the approach of how can you understand that there was a 30 height, it's explaining that the 30 height is based on Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was asking, how can you say, Tanakhama, that it's half the height and half the width? When you take a look at the Kodesh HaKodeshim, it was 30 amos tall and 20 by 20. So that's inconsistent. So that therefore has the two viewpoints. And so what we're asking here, when we ask, I don't understand, I thought that it was a 30 amos height, and yet there's a pasuk that says it's 20 amos. So we're asking according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. And so Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel will then tell you, no, that measurement of 20 is from the top of the Keruvim. But according to Rashi, that's not how we paskin, because we paskin like the Tanakama, that the measurement of the height should be half the width and the length. And so as a result, that's why the height in the Kodesh HaKodeshim was really 20. And this, according to the Gra, answers a very interesting question for us, which is, when the second Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt, there was no wall dividing the Kodesh HaKodeshim and the Kodesh. So you ended up with a room that was 60 by 20. Well, guess how tall they built that room? They built it 40 amos tall. So now we can understand why they built it 40 amos tall, because all the other dimensions are the same. So why would they build it 40 amos tall? Because now the room is a 60 by 20 room, and a 60 by 20 room, according to the Tanakhama, needs to have a 40 amo high ceiling. So I thought that was just so such a nice interpretation that fit both the Gemara and explained an interesting question, that I wanted to share that with you as well. Okay, so now we go back to Tzadik Tet Amud Aleph, and we are up to Amar Rabinai, which is 1, 2, 3, 4,
There was
5.
a curtain separating the Kodesh Kodashim instead of a wall.
Correct. There
right?
was only in the second Beis HaMikdash.
In the Beit HaMikdash Sheni, there was just a curtain, right?
That's exactly right. That's why you needed to treat it all as one room. And that's why you needed to have, according to the Gra, you needed to have the Vilna Gaon, you needed to have an additional 10 amos to the ceiling. That's exactly right. That's why you needed additional 10 amot high. Okay, so the seventh line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, second to last word on the line. Amar Rabinai, Amar Shmuel, Kruvim b'neis omdin, that actually the Kruvim themselves were a miracle. Shenamar, because how big were the Kruvim? V'chamesh amod kanaf hakruv ha'achat. Each of the Kruvim had a 5 amo wide wing. V'cheish amod kanaf hakruv ha'sheni. And each wing of the other was also 5 amos. And so we have Eser amos miketsos kanafav aketsos kanafav. And the wing tips from one wing to one edge of the wing to the other was 10 amos. So gufayu heika havu kaime. So if you imagine an angel with wings in the location of its arms, it was somehow, even though you measured from one end to the other as 10 amos, there was no space for the body that was between the two wings, because each of the wings measured 5 amos. So this is a similar miracle, is what Rabbi Benai is saying, to the miracle of the structure of the fact that the Aron itself didn't take up any space. So very similar, and so that's why we're going to quote it here. But yet, Ela Shmamina b'neis hein omdim. So we have to understand that there must have been a miracle that they were able to be there. So Maskif La Abaye. So now we're going to have 6 challenges that show that it doesn't have to have been a miracle, that all the things that we could say might be true. Now, and in addition, if in fact, well, we'll see. Let's take a look. So Maskif La Abaye. So Vidilma Bolton Qatar Nagolan Havukaime. Maybe their wings protruded like chickens, meaning that the wings were right next to each other, and that so as a result, instead of thinking of them as appendages that come out of the arm, think of them as if often at least in the shows that I've seen where there have been angels, the wings come out of the back. And so the wings are literally right next to each other. And so as a result, so then that's not a problem. So then they would be perfectly fitting. So Maskiv La Rava says, 1 second, even if you were to say that they fit perfectly as a result, because you have 2 5 amma wings, so that's 10 amos. You have 2 kruvim, so that's 20 amos, and the room is 20 amos wide. So doesn't that work? So, but maskip lo rava the dilma zeshalo keneged zeh havu kaimi. But maybe they were not. I'm sorry. So now this is a second challenge, a second way of saying that that you can that it could be a setup without being a miracle, because actually, even if Abaye was true, it would be 20 amos and 20 amos, which would be a very difficult thing to do, because usually you need to have some space to move things around. But Maskif Rava pointed out the following: maybe the angels overlapped a little bit, and so as a result, you didn't need the full space of if they didn't overlap. And then the third challenge, Maskif lo Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, the Dilma Ba'alaksona Havu Kaime. Maybe they were at an angle, and so as a result, they didn't need to have the full 20 amos. Maskif lo Rav Huna Braid de Rav Yoshua, the Dilma Besa Mi'ilai Rava. Maybe the roof, even though if you measured along the floor, it was 20 amos. The walls narrow as you go up, as we saw before when we discussed the width of the height needing to be like the width of the beam, and we said that the beam might be longer than the width at the bottom of the ground because the walls narrow. And so as a result, maybe that's the case, and that's how come you can have these kruvim set up there. Maskil, God bless you. Maskil Rav Papa, a fifth challenge. The Dilma make of havu kaife yadayu. Maybe their wings were bent, meaning that if the measurement of the wing was like the measurement of my arm, if my arm is at an angle like this going up, well, now it might be 5 amos, but if I measure the end from one end to the next, it's not necessarily 5 amos. So that also could be an explanation of how we could understand it. And finally, Maskif Love Rav Ashi, the Dilma Shalchufe Havu Mishalchafe. Maybe, the wings crossed so that they overlap. Now, so I think recognizing this, so it must be that when Rava says that they were not directly opposite one another, it means that they weren't, that they weren't necessarily in the exact same space. So they weren't in the same parallel line, which is very similar to Rav Ashi's question. Okay, so Ketzad Hein Omdim. So how did they stand? Meaning, which direction did they face? So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar. So we have a debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar.
I don't think it's so hard to understand that the wings couldn't. If you look at one's own body, the 2 clavicles meet, and there's very little space at the what we call the sternal notch. So that could represent the wings. So there's there's very little space on a human body. So those represent the points of the wings. So I could understand that there would be very little space. So one could accommodate 10 and 10 for both of them in line. One cheruv,
exactly,
another cheruv.
Exactly. That's how the Gemara ends. That in fact maybe this wasn't a miracle. That this does not have to. In the end we have not brought a proof. That obviously Rabbanai in the name of Shmuel had this as a tradition that there was a miracle, but in fact all of these challenges show that it didn't necessarily have to be a miracle. So Ketzad Hein Omdim. So how did the cherubs face one another? Which direction did they face? Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, Chad Amar Pneim Ishel Achiv. One said that they faced one another. V'chad Amar Pneim Labayas, and one of them said they faced towards the Beis Hamikdash itself. Ulaman de Amar. So they would have faced basically wherever the Aron itself. Ulaman de Amar Pneim Ish El Achiv. And according to the one that says that they faced one another, it says specifically that that they were facing the house itself, namely the Beis Hamikdash. So how can we understand that they were supposed to face each other when it says as well that they face the house, face the bayit? So lo kasha, Kan Bisman Yisrael Osin Ritzono Shel Makom, Kan Bisman She'ein Yisrael Osin Ritzono Shel Makom. That when they face one another, that's when they were that was because the Jewish people were doing what Hashem wants. But when they did not face one another, well, then they were facing the Beis Hamikdash, and they sort of did not face one another. Umanda Amar Ufneim Labayis, and according to the one who says that they faced the house, Haksiv Ufneim Ishel Achiv, it says that they faced one another. So how do we understand these two verses, right? So, and again, one of these verses is the Pneim Ish El Achiv is from Shmos Parakaf Hey, and the pasuk that says Upneim Labayis is from Divrei Hayamim Bet Parak Gimel pasuk Yud Gimel. So how do we understand that? So the Tanya Unkelis Hager Amar Kruvim Maisit Satsuin Hein, that the Kruvim were like children, Umitsudadin Pneihem, and their faces were angled at each other. Ketalmud Haniftar Mirabo, like a student taking leave of his teacher, meaning that that in fact they were sort of at effect. Imagine two things that are facing like this. So where the face is this direction. So one is facing this way, and one is facing this way. So we can say that they're facing the Aron, which is sort of in the middle, and at the same time, because although it's at an angle, so they're not directly against one another, they're facing each other. So that we can actually interpret it consistent with both. And so that is the explanation here. Now,
what does it actually mean when they're facing the bayit? They're in the bayit, the Beit HaMikdash. They're in the bayit.
So that I understood.
Are they facing the opening, the door?
I understood that they're facing the Aron itself. That's the way I understand it. Because you're absolutely right. I've been wondering about that as well. Unfortunately, it didn't occur to me until as I was reading it. But I believe that the interpretation that I would propose is that they were facing the Aron itself.
But aren't they sitting above the Aron?
Yes,
so they're facing themselves.
Remember that I said that these are the kruvim that are standing in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. These are not the kruvim that are literally on the Aron. These are the kruvim that are standing. These are the 10 amos tall kruvim that Shlomo HaMelech made. So that's the key difference. Often when we hear, and indeed the discussion in Maseches Yoma about the kruvim hugging one another, I understand that to be about the kruvim that are on the Aron itself. Or potentially the kruvim that were woven into the parochas. But the point is that these are kruvim that are the ones that are the tall 10 amos tall standing ones, as opposed to the kruvim that are on the Aron itself. But that's
if they're standing and they're looking at each other, the Aron is still between them, right? They're looking at the Aron then.
So they can't be at the same level as the Aron, because again, the Aron, the way I'm imagining it, the Aron, had some. It would be an even greater miracle if that were the case. But the way I understand it is they're set back a little bit, and so they're looking over the Aron. And so as a result, again, they would be facing, the Aron, you walk into the Kodesh HaKodeshim from the east. And so these would be facing west towards the Aron. But I'm not 100% sure. But you ask a good question, and I don't have a definitive.
I still don't. I'm thinking if there's one is standing on one side of the Aron, one on the other side of the Aron, and so when they turn towards each other, they're facing the Aron, right? So they're facing each other.
That would be one. Actually, you offer a valid explanation, but the fact that we say that they're at the mitzadeh atzdude. Now maybe we can interpret the mitzadeh atzdude, meaning that they are facing exactly what you're saying. That in fact that they're right by the side of the Aron. In
Right.
which case they're facing each other and they're facing the Aron, which could both be the case. But the Gemara doesn't. It seems like that facing the Aron and facing each other are not the same thing. And so, because that's what the machlokas is between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, because one of them says that they face each other, and one of them says that they face the Aron itself.
But it doesn't
So,
say, it says they're facing the bayit.
I
Because
know.
the
So
bayit-
the
the
question
bayit
is,
could
what
be
is the bayit
opening,
mean?
it could be the opening to the heichal.
That
And-
it could be. It could be. I mean, and that's possible. You know, it could be.
So then they're facing away from each other. Then if
Yeah.
they're looking at the opening, then they're not facing each other.
Correct. That's another way of understanding it. 100%. That could absolutely be. And indeed, you know, the English here of the art scroll specifically says that it means that they're facing east towards the Kodesh. And so you know, and so they, in this case, it could be that they're directly next to the Aron. But you know, so that could very well be that's the discussion. Okay. So we've offered a couple of different ways that we can interpret this this Gemara, but now we go back to rights of way of what's included when somebody sells something. So Mishi Yeshlo, as we pick up with the Mishnah. So Mishi Yeshlo bor lifnim mi beito shel chavero. If you have a pit that is inside the house of your friend, nichnas b'shasha derech b'nei adam nichnasin. You should go in only at the times that people go into houses. V'yotzi b'shasha derech b'nei adam yotzin, and you go out at the time that people leave, meaning during the daytime. Ve'eno machnis behemto umashke boro, and you can't bring your animal into the other person's house to get from the pit, to get water from the pit. Elamimole, rather you fill a container umashka mibachutz, and you give the animal to drink outside the person's home. And each one is going to make a lock. And the Gemara will ask the question. In fact, the Gemara begins with posachas lahecha. Well, 1 second. You know, how does what's the purpose of the homeowner putting a lock? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan shneim labor. They're both putting it on the pit. So Bishlam a balabor, it makes sense that why the owner of the pit is going to put the lock on the pit. Because he wants to watch over the water in his pit. He doesn't want the homeowner to take it. Why is the homeowner locking it? So Rabbi Lazar explains as we turn to Tzadik Tedem a bit, because of suspicion about his wife. Namely, that if somebody is coming into your house while you're not there, you're at work, and your wife is there, people are going to be suspicious. But what does the lock do? So Rashbam explains, top Rashbam on Tzadik Tedem a bet, aval hashta. Now that there's the lock, the enu yachol l'shov below balabayas, that the owner of the pit doesn't have the ability to take out water without the presence of the owner of the house. Lo yikanes l'sham achi yavo balabayas. There's no point in going into the house if the balabayas isn't there. Aval mishum geneva shelo yignov chavtzav shel balabayas. But it's not about lo chayshinan. But we're not worried about the person who owns the pit coming and stealing the objects that belong to the balabayas, because sha'isha mishameres is a bias, because the wife who's at home is going to watch over the house. And so as a result, therefore, it can't be that it's not talking about locking the rest of the house off, but rather it's locking the pit so that the other person doesn't come when it's not appropriate. Now, again, it's interesting because you could have said that the same logic would also highlight that the person shouldn't come, you know, at off hours, because now you just won't give him the key. But in any event, this is this is how the Gemara concludes. And so now we'll take a look at the next Mishnah, which again continues with the rights of people who have a right of way. So Mishi yesh lo gina lifnim megina social chavero. So if you have a garden that's inside somebody else's garden, that the access to your garden is only through somebody else's garden, nichnas b'shah shederach b'nei adam nichnasim b'yotzi b'shah shederach b'nei adam yotzin. So you have to go in and out at the right times. The eno machnas l'tocha tagrin, and you can't bring merchants in there. Meaning, if you are growing produce in your garden, you can't, and now you, to access your garden, you have to come through my garden. You can't bring the merchants into my garden. You need to go through. You need to bring out your stuff. Below you can and let's say you could access another field from your garden that isn't your garden. Well, you can't go through my garden to as a shortcut, exactly, to something else. You have the right to go through my garden to get to your garden, but that's it. You don't get to do anything else from there. Now, what rights do I have to the path that you're going to take? So I have the right to plant on the pathway that you were going to take. And Rashbam explains the reasoning. If we take a look at the Rashbam, it's basically right opposite the first wide line in the Rashbam, wide line of the Gemara in the Rashbam. So again, the outer one can plant the pathway. Since this pathway is in the middle of his field, we know mikol v'kol. He did not give up all the outer guy, namely me in this situation. I didn't give up all of my rights to the pathway that you have to get to your inner field. Shelo yuchal lizrosham, that I should not be able to plant there. However,
why would he do that? Because the other person can trample his field.
Yes, that's true. He could, but if I plant, potatoes, then your trampling won't do that much damage. Yes, I have to be recognize that I might not be able to take full advantage of all the things, but also I know you're a nice guy, and I know that you won't purposely step on my stuff, and so as a result, I'll get some additional space for planting. And again, it's important to remember that we're talking about a world in which a palace was 8 by 8, or 10 by 10. So we're not talking about we're talking about a situation where people were very poor and every inch really mattered. Okay, so again, it's important to remember the blessings that Hashem has given us. All right, Nasno lo derech min hatzad. What happens if you gave? We're now 1, 2, 3, 6 lines down on Daf Tzadik Tet Amabet. That if in fact there was a path on the side, so what's the story? Does that change anything? Well, then midash nehem, and it was done based on both of them agreeing. Well, now, because I've given you a path that goes along the side of my field, well, then nichnas b'shashu rotza. Now you can go in whenever you want. B'yotzi b'shashu rotza. And you can go out whenever you want. Magduz l'tocha tagrin, you can even bring in merchants because you're not trampling through the middle of my field where every additional step is damaging. Below you kanes mitocha l'tocha de'acher, but you still can't use it as a shortcut to get to another field. And neither of us have any right to plant because I put this on the side of my field. So now I understand that it's going to just be for traveling, for traversing it in order to access your field. Okay, so now that finishes the Mishnah. We pick up with the Gemara. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Ama beis hashlachin ani mocher lach. If I say that I'm selling you a Amma, which is basically an Amma wide canal, in order to irrigate your field, no saying low beis amos l'tocha. You have to give 2 amos for the amma of the canal itself, and amma mikan la'agapeha, and you need to give an amma on either side for the banks. So it ends up being a 4 amma wide space that you end up giving. Amma beis hakilo nanomani mocher lacha. If I say I'm selling you a canal for to give water to a pond. So nozin la ama achas l'tocha, then one ama is sufficient for the canal itself. V'chatzi ama mikan, v'chatzi ama mikan la'agapah, and you only need a half ama on either side. V'osan agapayim mizoram. Now we saw in our Mishnah that if I give you a path, I may have a right to plant on it. So the Gemara asks, in this case as well, do I have a right to plant on those paths, on the walking area, on the banks? So Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Baal Hasada Zoram, the owner of the field, meaning the person who sells the canal, has the right to plant there. Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Baal Hasada Notam. And so did Rav Nachman in the name of Shmuel say the exact same, say a similar thing. So the first one was to plant Zoreya is to plant all kinds of plants. Note in is to plant with trees. So what's the difference? So the Gemara explains, Manda Amar Zoram, the one who says that you can plant all kinds of things, Kol Shekain Notam, you can certainly plant trees. And the Rashbam explains, it's 1, 2, 3, fourth line in the Rashbam, last words on the line is Kol Shekain Notam, as we begin now the fifth line of the widest lines in the Rashbam. De'enu mekalkal ha'agafim, that it doesn't ruin the banks. Shahashorashim ma'amikim, because the trees have deep roots. Ma'amikim harbe, they go down a lot. Ve'ein mezikin esfato, and they don't break through the boundaries. Aval hazorim mitpashim miyad bitoch hashlosha umechalkalim hakarka milamala misfato. So, but when it comes to plantings, other kinds of plants, well, then those are not going to. They spread out. Their roots spread out immediately within 3 tvachim of the top of the ground, and therefore they are going to damage the ground above the edge of the bottom edge of the ama of the irrigation of the canal. And so as a result, we might think that if you allow it, that if you allow anything, you're only going to allow the planting of trees and not necessarily the planting of other items. But Uman da Amar no Am.
Wait a second. He says that he says Man Damar Zoram Koshike no Dam. So it seems to imply
Exactly.
that the planting of vegetables is accepted, because even more so you allow you to plant the trees.
You're reading it the wrong direction. That if you say that you can plant the other kinds of things, then you would certainly say that you can also plant trees.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, then that's exactly right. That's the point. That's exactly what we just saw in Rashbam.
So why isn't he then agreeing? It's suggesting that if you're allowed to plant vegetables, then certainly you can plant trees, right?
Correct. Exactly. That's what I just said.
So why is the Rashbam suggesting that
the Rashbam is
vegetables would be makalkel the ground?
No, that's the point. The point is that vegetables could be makalkel. And so if I allow you to do vegetables, well, then certainly I'm going to allow you to do trees, because the trees won't damage the edge of the canal. That's the whole point. So there were two opinions. Remember, we had 2 opinions in what Shmuel said. We had Rav Nachman and Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said that you can grow anything, and Rav Nachman says you can just grow trees. So according to Rav Yehuda, who said Shmuel said that you can grow anything, so you can also certainly grow trees, because you could grow low down plants that are going to spread out. But and we continue in the Gemara now. Aval Zoram. But if, according to the second opinion, which said, according to, again, this was Rav Nachman, who said that you can only plant trees, Aval Zoram, he would say when it comes to planting of other things, you would not be able to, because it's going to go into the bank of the canal, and it could potentially cause a problem. So for Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, and Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel an additional item, Amas Hamayim Shekalo Agapeha. If in fact, again, Rav Yehuda is the one who said that the owner of the field can plant anything. So what happens if when he plants anything, he ends up causing the bank of the irrigation canal to collapse. Mitakna omeota sadeh. He has the right, the owner of the canal can repair it using soil, using the dirt from the field in which the canal is located, meaning that the one who planted the vegetables has to give dirt to the person who is whose canal it is, because their vegetables may have been the thing that caused the damage to the irrigation canal.
But he's still allowed to plant those vegetables.
But he's still allowed to do it. Exactly.
Even though that it can cause damage.
Exactly.
So that's sort of what the Rashbam is saying. We know that it can cause damage.
Yes,
So
exactly.
even
That's
more
exactly
so,
what the Rashbam
if we know that, we're going to allow you to plant the trees.
Correct. Exactly. That's exactly the point. So biadua shelo chalu agapeha ela be'osa sadeh. Because we know for sure that the banks collapsed, that any of the dirt ended up on that field. 1 second, Maskevla Rapapa 1 second. V'lei malei mayach ashblua la'arech. Maybe the water swept the soil away. So how do I know that it necessarily went to went onto my field? It may be the collapsing of the bank of the canal. The dirt went into the canal and flowed with the water away from my field. So how do I know that that's what the story is? So Ella Amar Rapapa, so Rapapa explained, no, it's not that I know for certain that the banks collapsed onto my field. Ella Sha'al Manas Kane Kibo Alav Bala said that the owner of the field had this in mind when he consented to letting the canal be on his property. So when he sold the canal, it meant that if there was ever a collapse in the canal, the person would be able to rebuild the canal based on dirt on the guy's own property. So that if essentially some of the canal wore away, so now he can rebuild that canal based on that dirt. And again, we saw that one of the reasons that Rav Yehuda may allow this is because he's the one who allows us to have the owner of the field plant even things that have the potential for ruining the canal. And so therefore, if it might ruin the canal, we want to make sure that the canal owner has the right to rebuild. So we will pick up from here, from this Mishnah, God willing, tomorrow. We are going to learn tomorrow and each of the next days at 1 hour before Mincha. So let me tell you when those times are. And this is true even on Shabbos,
Eli said he was going to teach Motzei Shabbat.
I don't think he's teaching this Motzei Shabbat. I traded with him because he was not able to do this Motzei Shabbat. He's away.
He said he's going. Well, this is what our discussion with him. He said he's going to be in Manhattan, but when he gets back, he would teach the daf about 9 o'clock. That's what he said.
I will double check with him. I will double check with him and send out. But assuming that, because I understood that I'm going to cover this Shabbos and Shabbos of Yom Kippur. No, he's going to take care of Yom Kippur. I'm going to take this Shabbos and the Shabbos of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, and he is going to end up handling all of Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah. But let me give you the time so
just check with him on that, because he
hold
did
on just a second. You know what? I'm going to stop the recording.